Ethan Parker's sneakers crunched against the gravel path as he jogged through Griffith Park, his favorite escape from the meticulously curated world he had built. The late afternoon sun dipped below the horizon, casting the landscape in shades of amber and shadow. He inhaled deeply, the air crisp with the faint scent of eucalyptus, a welcome change from the cloying fragrance of his gym. It had been another exhausting day. Clients demanded not only results, but validation, endless selfies, and carefully staged workout routines. Fitness, once Ethan's passion, now felt like a business of appearances. The thought gnawed at him as his feet carried him farther along the trail. That's when he saw her. She was sitting alone on a weathered bench, her body slightly hunched, a tattered book balanced on her lap. Her jeans were faded, the hem frayed, and her oversized sweater hung loosely on her frame. In one hand, she held a small piece of bread, breaking it into crumbs to feed the scrawny gray kitten at her feet. Ethan slowed his pace, curious. She didn't notice him at first, completely absorbed in her task. There was something about her. Maybe the way she bit her lip as she read, or how she gently spoke to the kitten as if it were an old friend. The kitten darted forward, pawing at her shoes. She chuckled softly and tossed another crumb, murmuring, "You're a demanding little thing, aren't you? You should be grateful I even have this bread." Ethan smiled despite himself. There was something grounding about the scene, something real. He hadn't realized how much he craved that until now. The kitten, as if sensing his presence, bolted toward him. Ethan stopped short, his hands instinctively rising. "Whoa there, buddy," he said with a laugh, crouching to greet the tiny creature. Startled, the woman looked up. Her hazel eyes locked onto his, widening slightly as she took in his tall, athletic frame and sweat-soaked shirt. She quickly closed her book, holding it protectively to her chest as if shielding herself. "Sorry about him," she said, her voice low but steady. "He's got no manners." Ethan straightened, brushing his hands on his shorts. "No problem. I guess I must have interrupted your dinner party." A smile tugged at her lips, though she tried to suppress it. "Hardly a party. It's just me and Mr. Picky Eater here." Ethan tilted his head. "Mr. Picky Eater? That's quite the name." "Well, it fits," she replied, glancing down at the kitten. "He won't eat anything but the soft middle of the bread. Leaves the crusts for me." Ethan laughed, the sound surprising even himself. "Smart cat. Knows what he wants." She shrugged, her posture relaxing slightly. "Don't we all?" "Do we?" he countered, his tone light but probing. "Because I think half the people I know are just pretending to know." Her gaze sharpened, studying him. "And what about you? Are you pretending too?" The question caught him off guard. He hesitated, then grinned. "Touché. Maybe I am." She nodded, satisfied. "Well, at least you're honest." For a moment, they stood in comfortable subtle silence, the kitten weaving between Ethan's legs before scampering back to her. He noticed the book in her lap again, the corners worn, pages slightly yellowed. "What are you reading?" he asked, nodding toward it. She hesitated, her fingers tightening on the cover. "It's nothing special, just a romance novel." "Nothing wrong with that," he said easily. "I don't have much time to read, but when I do, I'm a sucker for a good story." She raised an eyebrow. "You? Mr. Jogging Adonis over here? Somehow I doubt that." Ethan chuckled. "You'd be surprised. Even Adonis needs a break from protein shakes and bench presses." She laughed at that, a soft, melodic sound that seemed to lighten the air around them. "Fair enough. It's called Wild at Heart. Probably too cheesy for your taste." "Try me," he said, crossing his arms. "What's it about?" She hesitated, then relented. "It's about this woman who moves to a small town to escape her past, but she ends up falling for this grumpy mechanic who, surprise, has a tragic backstory of his own." Ethan nodded thoughtfully. "Sounds intense? Does it have a happy ending?" Her smile faltered. "I don't know yet. I guess I'm hoping it does." Their eyes met again, and for a moment Ethan felt a strange pull, as if she were someone he'd known in another life. "I'm Ethan, by the way," he said, offering his hand. She hesitated, then took it. "Grace. Nice to meet you, Grace." "You too," she said, her voice softer now. The kitten meowed loudly, breaking the spell. Grace laughed, bending down to pick it up. "Looks like someone's ready for dessert." "Do you come here often?" Ethan asked, immediately cringing at how cliched it sounded. Grace didn't seem to mind. "Sometimes. It's quiet, and the people watching isn't bad." "Well, if you're ever up for a change of scenery, you should stop by my gym," he said. "It's not as quiet, but I think you'd like it." She looked at him skeptically. Your gym? Are you a trainer or something? Something like that, he said, not wanting to brag. I could help you work on your posture. Sitting with a book all day probably isn't great for your back. Grace narrowed her eyes playfully. Are you saying I have bad posture? Not at all, he said with a grin. Just offering my professional opinion. She shook her head, smiling. I'll think about it. Ethan pulled out his phone. Here, let me give you my number. No pressure, just if you're interested. Grace hesitated before finally typing it in. All right, but no promises. I'm not exactly gym material. Grace, he said, his tone serious now. The gym's for everyone. Trust me. She looked at him, something shifting in her expression. We'll see. As she turned to leave, the kitten still cradled in her arms, Ethan watched her go, feeling an unfamiliar sense of anticipation. Grace wasn't like anyone he'd met before, and for the first time in a long time, he found himself wanting to know more. The morning sun poured through the large glass windows of Echelon Fitness, Ethan Parker's state-of-the-art gym in downtown Los Angeles. Inside, everything gleamed with pristine perfection. From the polished equipment to the curated playlists pulsing through hidden speakers, every detail screamed luxury. It was a temple for the elite, and everyone in it seemed to belong, except Grace Mitchell. She stood just inside the entrance, gripping the strap of her canvas bag like a lifeline. Her usual confidence, the kind she carried in quiet corners of parks or behind the anonymity of her desk, had evaporated the moment she stepped through the doors. Everyone here looked like they had walked off a magazine cover. Their toned bodies moved fluidly through intricate exercises, while she felt like a mismatched puzzle piece dropped into a perfect picture. Grace! Ethan's voice broke through her spiraling thoughts, warm and welcoming. She turned to see him approaching, dressed in a fitted black t-shirt and athletic shorts that seemed to highlight every muscle. His wide smile instantly put her somewhat at ease. Hey, she said, trying to sound casual, though her voice wavered slightly. I'm not sure this is my scene. Ethan chuckled, stopping a few feet from her. You haven't even stepped onto the floor yet. Give it a chance. She raised an eyebrow. Ethan, have you seen these people? I feel like I should have hired a stylist before coming here. Trust me, you're fine, he said, lowering his voice as he leaned in slightly. Most of these people spend more time picking out their gym outfits than actually working out. That earned him a small laugh. Good to know I'm not missing the secret dress code. Not at all. Just be yourself. Come on, I'll show you around. Ethan led her deeper into the gym, explaining the layout and different sections. Grace nodded along, her nerves slowly easing as he cracked jokes and kept the tone light. But her self-consciousness resurfaced when they reached the main weight area. She couldn't help but notice the glances from a group of women in matching pastel leggings and sports bras, their perfectly sculpted figures glowing under the gym lights. New client? One of them, a brunette with piercing blue eyes, called out, her tone polite but loaded with unspoken judgment. Yeah, this is Grace, Ethan replied without missing a beat. She's here to work on some back strength. The brunette's gaze flickered over Grace briefly before she smiled tightly. Well, welcome. Ethan's the best, so you're in good hands. Grace mustered a polite smile, but she felt the weight of their scrutiny long after they turned away. Ethan noticed the shift in her demeanor and gently touched her elbow. Ignore them, he said softly. They're more concerned about their reflection in the mirror than anything else. Grace sighed. Easier said than done. They reached a quieter corner of the gym, where Ethan had set up a mat and a few lightweight dumbbells. All right, he said, clapping his hands together. Let's start simple. I'll walk you through a few moves to loosen up your shoulders and strengthen your core. Deal? She nodded, trying to focus. Ethan's easygoing demeanor helped, and soon she found herself laughing at his exaggerated demonstrations of what not to do. The tension in her shoulders eased, and for the first time, she felt like maybe she could handle this. After about 20 minutes, Grace was sitting on the mat, catching her breath, when Ethan handed her a bottle of water. Not bad for a first-timer, he said, sitting down beside her. Not bad? She repeated, mock offended. I'll have you know I'm amazing at lying on a mat and pretending to stretch. He grinned. True, you've got a real talent for that. She laughed, the sound echoing softly in the space. For a moment, the noise and judgmental stares of the gym seemed far away. You're different from most people I see here. Ethan said after a pause, his tone thoughtful. Grace arched an eyebrow. Different how? Because I'm not built like a Barbie doll? Because you're real, he said simply. Most people come here chasing some version of themselves they think they need to be. You're just you. And that's refreshing. Her cheeks warmed at his words, though she wasn't sure how to respond. I don't know if real is the compliment you think it is, she said lightly, deflecting. It is, he said firmly, his gaze steady. Trust me. The rest of the session passed quickly, and Grace was surprised at how much she enjoyed herself. By the time she left, she felt lighter now, though a small part of her still worried about how she'd been perceived. Her worries weren't entirely unfounded. Across the gym, Savannah Hayes, Ethan's ex-girlfriend and one of his wealthiest clients, watched the interaction with thinly veiled disdain. Her manicured nails tapped rhythmically against the side of her smoothie cup as she whispered to a friend. Who is she? The friend asked, glancing toward Grace as she walked out the door. Just some charity case Ethan's taken under his wing, Savannah replied, her voice dripping with condescension. I mean, look at her. She's not exactly his type. Her friend smirked. Maybe he's going through a phase. Savannah's jaw tightened. Or maybe he needs a reminder of who he really belongs with. Grace returned to the gym a few days later, this time feeling slightly more confident. Ethan greeted her with the same warmth, but she couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. As she moved through her exercises, she caught Savannah's sharp gaze from across the room more than once. Is she always like that? Grace asked Ethan quietly during a water break, nodding subtly toward Savannah. Ethan followed her gaze and sighed. Savannah? Yeah, she's complicated. Grace raised an eyebrow. Complicated, as in your ex? Something like that, he admitted, running a hand through his hair. She's a client, but we dated a while back. It didn't end well. Grace frowned. And now she just hangs around your gym, glaring at people you train? Pretty much, Ethan said with a shrug. Don't let her bother you. She's harmless. But Grace wasn't so sure. There was something about Savannah's icy demeanor that set her on edge. By the end of the week, Grace felt a small but noticeable change in herself. She wasn't just getting stronger physically. She was beginning to believe she might actually belong here, despite the whispers and stares. But just as she started to settle in, Savannah made her move. Grace, right? Savannah approached her after a session, all smiles and false friendliness. I've seen you around. You're new. Yeah, Grace said cautiously. I've been working with Ethan. Savannah's smile tightened. He's a great trainer, one of the best. But just a little advice? Don't take his kindness the wrong way. Ethan's generous with his time, but he has a certain image to maintain. People talk, you know? Grace stiffened, the insinuation clear. Thanks for the advice, she said flatly, brushing past Savannah before she could say more. Her confidence, so painstakingly built, felt like it had been yanked out from under her. As she left the gym that day, Ethan's words about being real replayed in her mind, but now they felt hollow. Could she trust him? Or was she just another project for him, something to fix? The questions lingered, setting the stage for the deeper challenges yet to come. Grace sat at her desk, staring blankly at her laptop screen. The deadline for a client project loomed, but her mind was elsewhere. Savannah's words from the gym echoed relentlessly in her head. Ethan's generous with his time, but he has a certain image to maintain. People talk, you know? Her chest tightened as doubt crept in. Was Savannah right? Had Ethan been kind to her out of pity? Or worse, obligation? Maybe she'd misinterpreted his encouragement, his warmth. Shaking her head, she pushed the thought aside. She had no time to dwell on gym drama. At least, that's what she told herself. But the next morning, her resolve crumbled when her phone buzzed with a message from an unfamiliar number. It was from Riley, a fellow gym goer she had chatted with a few times during warm-ups. The text read, Hey Grace, just wanted to give you a heads up. People at the gym are talking about you and Ethan. Savannah's stirring the pot. Figured you'd want to know. Grace's stomach dropped. She read the message twice, her fingers trembling. What was there to talk about? She and Ethan weren't even anything. Were they? Taking a deep breath, she typed back, Thanks for letting me know. Do you know what they're saying? The response came almost instantly. Savannah's claiming Ethan's only training you because he feels sorry for you. Some of her friends are joking that he's your charity case. The words hit Grace like a punch to the gut. She closed her eyes, her face burning with humiliation. Charity case? Was that how people saw her? And worse, was that how Ethan saw her? That evening, Grace walked into the gym with trepidation. She'd promised herself she wouldn't let petty gossip dictate her actions, but every glance in her direction felt magnified. Whispers seemed to follow her, though she couldn't tell if they were real or imagined. Ethan greeted her with his usual grin, his tone as friendly as ever. Hey, Grace, ready to crush it today? She forced a smile. Yeah, let's do it. But as the session went on, Grace couldn't shake her unease. Every time Ethan corrected her form or offered encouragement, her mind buzzed with questions. Was he just being kind? Was she truly a project to him? The weight of the gossip pressed down on her until she couldn't take it anymore. Can we take a break? She blurted out, cutting him off mid-sentence. Ethan raised an eyebrow but nodded. Sure. What's up? Grace hesitated, unsure how to phrase her thoughts without sounding paranoid. Finally, she took a deep breath. Are people talking about me? About us? Ethan's expression shifted, concern replacing his usual easygoing demeanor. What do you mean? Someone told me Savannah's been spreading rumors, she said, her voice wavering. That you're only training me out of pity. That I'm some kind of charity case. Ethan's jaw tightened. He stood up straighter, his easy smile gone. Grace, that's not true. None of it. But people think it, she pressed. They think I don't belong here, and honestly, maybe they're right. I mean, look at me. I'm not like your other clients. Grace, Ethan said firmly, his voice low but intense. You belong here just as much as anyone else. If Savannah or anyone else has a problem with that, it's their issue, not yours. She looked away, her throat tightening. It's hard to ignore, though. I don't want to be some running joke at your gym. You're not, he said, his tone softening. And if anyone says otherwise, they'll have to answer to me. His sincerity was evident, but Grace couldn't shake the doubt gnawing at her. She nodded, not trusting herself to say more, and the session resumed in strained silence. The next day, Ethan confronted Savannah. She was perched at the smoothie bar, laughing with two of her friends when he approached. Hey, Savannah, got a minute? He asked, his tone polite but clipped. She looked up, her smile faltering slightly at his serious expression. Of course. What's up? Ethan gestured for her to follow him to a quieter corner of the gym. Once they were out of earshot, he crossed his arms. What are you doing? Savannah feigned innocence. What do you mean? Don't play dumb, he snapped, his voice low but firm. You've been spreading rumors about Grace. Why? Savannah scoffed, her demeanor shifting from playful to defensive. I'm just telling the truth. People are curious, Ethan. They're wondering why you're spending so much time on her. Because she's my client, he said sharply. And a damn good one, too. Whatever your issue is, leave her out of it. Savannah rolled her eyes. Oh, come on. You can't seriously be interested in her. She's... Stop, Ethan interrupted, his tone ice cold. Whatever you were about to say, don't. Grace is none of your business, and if I hear you've said anything else about her, we're done. Do you understand me? Savannah's jaw tightened, her confidence momentarily shaken. But as Ethan walked away, her eyes narrowed. If she couldn't have Ethan, she wasn't about to let someone like Grace take her place. Grace tried to push through her lingering self-doubt, but the whispers only grew louder, or so it seemed. During a quiet moment at the gym, Riley pulled her aside. Hey, Riley said, glancing around to make sure no one was listening. I heard Savannah got chewed out by Ethan yesterday. She's furious. Grace frowned. What does that have to do with me? Riley hesitated. She's doubling down. She told a few people you're using Ethan to get free training and that you're... Okay, I don't need to hear this, Grace said, cutting her off. Her voice trembled, but her gaze was steady. I get it. She hates me. But I'm not here for her, and I don't care what she thinks. Riley nodded, her expression apologetic. I just thought you should know. She's not going to stop unless someone shuts her down. She can say whatever she wants, Grace said, though her heart wasn't in it. I'm done letting her control how I feel. But despite her words, Grace felt the weight of Savannah's campaign every time she entered the gym. It wasn't just about her anymore. It was about the perception that Ethan's reputation was tied to her presence. One evening, as Grace was leaving the gym, Ethan caught up with her. Hey, he said, falling into step beside her. I know things have been rough, but I want you to know I'm handling it. Grace glanced at him, her brow furrowed. Handling what? Everything with Savannah, he said. She's toxic. Yeah, but I'm making it clear that she doesn't get to dictate how things work around here. Grace sighed, her shoulders slumping. It's not just Savannah, Ethan. It's everyone. I feel like I'm walking into a room where the only thing people see is what I'm not. Ethan stopped, turning to face her. Then let's remind them what you are. You're strong, Grace. You're determined. And you've come farther than most people who walk into this place. Don't let anyone take that away from you. His words hung in the air between them, charged with an intensity Grace hadn't expected. For the first time, she felt a flicker of something stronger than doubt, a defiance she hadn't realized she possessed. Thanks, she said quietly, meeting his gaze. I needed to hear that. Ethan smiled, his warmth breaking through the tension. Anytime. As Grace walked to her car, she felt a small but significant shift within her. Savannah's whispers might not stop here, but Grace was starting to realize that the only voice that truly mattered was her own. Ethan sat in his office at Echelon Fitness, staring at the contract spread out before him. The gym had always been his sanctuary, but lately it felt more like a battleground. Between Savannah's petty games and Grace's lingering doubts, the energy in the space had shifted. And now, this, the offer of a lifetime. The contract was from a major corporate fitness chain. They wanted to buy into Ethan's brand, expand his name into a nationwide phenomenon. Exclusive gyms, lucrative endorsements, and cutting-edge equipment, it was everything he'd dreamed of when he first opened Echelon. But there was a catch, as there always was. We need to ensure that the Parker name remains synonymous with excellence, the sleek-haired executive had said during their meeting. Image is everything. We're investing in more than just your methods. We're investing in you. It was a subtle jab, but Ethan knew what it meant. The undercurrent was clear. Grace's presence, her very existence in the pristine bubble of his gym, threatened the glossy perfection they were trying to sell. Ethan could already hear the whispers. How could someone like her represent the Parker brand? His stomach churned as he reread the clause about maintaining a consistent image aligned with market expectations. It wasn't just about Grace. It was about the philosophy he'd worked so hard to build. If he signed, he'd be trading authenticity for a polished lie. And yet, the allure of financial security and national recognition was hard to ignore. Grace arrived at the gym later that day, unaware of the storm brewing in Ethan's mind. She had her own battles to fight. The whispers hadn't stopped, but she was determined to push through. If she left now, Savannah would win, and Grace refused to give her that satisfaction. She found Ethan in the weightlifting area, adjusting a set of dumbbells. Hey, she said, trying to sound casual. Got time for me, or are you saving all your brilliance for the VIPs? Ethan looked up, his face lighting up despite his internal conflict. Always have time for you, Grace. You know that. Good, she said, setting down her bag, because I was thinking about trying the big scary machines today. You might need to call an ambulance. He laughed, the tension in his chest easing momentarily. I think we'll survive. Come on, I'll walk you through it. As they worked through her session, Grace noticed that Ethan seemed distracted. He smiled and gave his usual tips, but his focus wasn't entirely on her. Between sets, she finally asked, What's going on with you today? You seem off. Ethan hesitated, debating whether to tell her. He'd always prided himself on being transparent with his clients, but this was different. Grace wasn't just a client anymore. She was someone he cared about, someone who made him question the very foundation of his career. It's nothing, he said after a moment, forcing a smile. Just some business stuff. Boring, really. Grace gave him a skeptical look. Boring doesn't usually make you look like you're carrying the weight of the world. Spill it, Parker. He sighed, leaning against a nearby bench. All right, fine. I got an offer to partner with a big corporate chain. They want to expand my brand, open gyms across the country. That sounds amazing, Grace said, though she couldn't help but notice the way his tone darkened. Why do you look like it's the worst thing in the world? Because it comes with strings, he admitted. They want me to maintain this image. Perfect clients, perfect trainers, perfect everything. It's not what I built this place for. Her heart sank as she realized what he wasn't saying outright. You mean people like me, she said quietly. Ethan's head snapped up. Grace, no, that's not what I. But it's what they mean, right? She interrupted, her voice trembling, despite her best efforts to stay calm. They don't want someone like me in their glossy brochures. I get it. Grace, stop, he said, stepping closer. This isn't about you. It's about them and their shallow, cookie-cutter vision of what fitness should look like. And for the record, I haven't decided anything yet. She crossed her arms, trying to mask her vulnerability with defiance. Well, don't let me get in the way of your big break, Ethan. I wouldn't want to ruin your perfect brand. Ethan reached for her arm, his grip gentle but firm. You're not ruining anything. If anything, you remind me why I started this in the first place. Don't let those idiots dictate how you see yourself. Grace held his gaze for a moment before looking away. Maybe not, but it feels like they already have. Later that evening, Ethan found himself replaying their conversation. Grace's words lingered, fueling his growing frustration with the corporate offer. He thought back to the first time he'd met her in the park, how genuine and unguarded she'd been. She wasn't just another client. She was proof that fitness wasn't about fitting into a mold. It was about strength, resilience, and the courage to show up. But the contract wasn't the only issue. Savannah was still stirring the pot, and Ethan knew she wouldn't stop unless he took a stand. He decided it was time to address the situation head-on. The next morning, Savannah strutted into the gym wearing her usual designer activewear, her entourage trailing behind her. Ethan intercepted her near the smoothie bar. "Savannah, we need to talk," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. She smirked, feigning innocence. "Of course, Ethan. What's on your mind?" "You know damn well what's on my mind," he said, his voice low but firm. "I've had enough of your games. The rumors, the passive-aggressive comments. It stops now." Savannah's smile faltered, but she quickly recovered. "I don't know what you're talking about. I've been nothing but supportive." "Cut the crap," he snapped. "You're not just hurting Grace. You're hurting this gym and everything it stands for. If you can't respect that, you're not welcome here anymore." Her eyes narrowed, the mask of charm slipping. "You're seriously choosing her over me? After everything I've done for you?" "This isn't about sides," Ethan said firmly. "It's about integrity. And if you can't handle that, maybe you should find another gym." Savannah glared at him, her jaw tightening. "You'll regret this," she hissed before storming out, her entourage scrambling to follow. Grace heard about the confrontation later that day from Riley. The news left her stunned and conflicted. Part of her was grateful for Ethan's support, but another part worried that she'd become more trouble than she was worth. When she saw Ethan that evening, she hesitated before approaching him. "I heard about Savannah," she said quietly. "You didn't have to do that." "Yes, I did," he replied without hesitation. "She crossed a line, and I'm not letting anyone treat you or anyone else like that." Grace looked down, unsure how to respond. Finally, she said, "You're a good guy, Ethan, but I don't want to be the reason you lose everything you've worked for." He stepped closer, his gaze steady. "Grace, you're not the reason. You're the reminder. You've helped me see what really matters, and that's worth more than any contract or endorsement deal." Her heart swelled at his words, but doubt still lingered. "What if it's not enough?" she asked softly. Ethan smiled, his voice filled with quiet determination. "Then we prove them wrong, together." For the first time in weeks, Grace felt a spark of hope. Maybe, just maybe, she wasn't as out of place as she thought. And maybe Ethan was exactly the kind of person who could help her see that. The hum of treadmills and the rhythmic clang of weights filled Echelon Fitness, but for Grace, the noise felt like static. Her body moved mechanically through the exercises Ethan had shown her weeks ago, but her heart wasn't in it. Despite Ethan's assurances, the whispers and glances still lingered, gnawing at her confidence. Riley's words echoed in her head, "Savannah's doubling down. She's not going to stop unless someone shuts her down." Ethan had tried, and for a few days, it seemed like things were better. But Grace couldn't shake the feeling that she was fighting a losing battle, and worse, dragging Ethan down with her. As Grace racked her weights, she caught Savannah's unmistakable voice slicing through the gym's ambient noise. The former model and self-proclaimed queen of Echelon Fitness stood near the smoothie bar, flanked by her usual entourage. Grace could feel Savannah's gaze on her, the smirk curling on her lips as she leaned in to whisper something to her friends. Laughter followed, sharp and pointed. Grace clenched her fists, debating whether to confront Savannah or walk away. Before she could decide, Savannah sauntered toward her, her every step oozing calculated confidence. Grace, Savannah said, her voice dripping with faux sweetness. I've been meaning to talk to you. Grace straightened, forcing herself to meet Savannah's gaze. Oh, about what? Savannah crossed her arms, her smile never reaching her eyes. I just wanted to clear the air. You know, people talk, and I'd hate for you to feel unwelcome here. Grace raised an eyebrow. How thoughtful of you. Savannah's smile tightened. Ethan's a great guy, isn't he? So kind, always looking out for the underdog. The jab landed, but Grace refused to flinch. Ethan's been nothing but supportive. It's a shame not everyone can say the same. Savannah laughed. A cold, hollow sound. Oh, sweetie, you've got it all wrong. I'm just being honest. Ethan's a professional, but this isn't your world. It's only a matter of time before he realizes that. Grace's stomach twisted, but she held her ground. Thanks for the advice, Savannah. I'll be sure to pass it along to someone who actually cares. With that, she turned on her heel and walked away, her heart pounding. She could feel Savannah's eyes boring into her back, but she didn't stop. She wouldn't give her the satisfaction. Later that evening, Ethan found Grace in the stretching area, her face tight with frustration. He sat down beside her, his expression full of concern. You okay? He asked gently. Grace sighed, not meeting his gaze. Savannah. Ethan's jaw tightened. What did she say this time? Nothing I haven't heard before, Grace said, her voice strained. But maybe she's right. Maybe I don't belong here. Ethan reached out, placing a hand on her arm. Grace, stop. You're stronger than this. She looked at him then, her eyes brimming with unshed tears. Am I? Because it doesn't feel like it. Everywhere I go, it's like I have to prove myself. To her, to the people here, to myself. And I'm tired, Ethan. He exhaled sharply, his frustration not with her, but with the situation. You don't have to prove anything to anyone, least of all Savannah. She's insecure, Grace. That's why she's targeting you. She sees your strength, and it terrifies her. Grace let out a bitter laugh. Strength? I can barely look in the mirror without second-guessing myself. Then let me remind you, Ethan said firmly. You've come so far, Grace. You're not the same person who walked into this gym a few weeks ago. You're stronger, inside and out. For a moment, Grace let his words sink in, her breathing evening out. It's just hard, you know, feeling like you're always a step behind. Ethan smiled softly. The only race you're running is with yourself. And trust me, you're winning. But things came to a head a few days later during a crowded evening at the gym. Grace was finishing her workout when she heard Savannah's voice again, louder this time. She was speaking to a small group of clients near the cardio machines, her tone dripping with mockery. I mean, bless her heart, Savannah said, her voice carrying over the hum of the gym. It's cute that she's trying, but let's be honest, some people just don't have it in them. Grace froze, heat rising in her cheeks. She could feel the stares, the barely concealed laughter. The humiliation was suffocating. Without thinking, she grabbed her bag and bolted for the door. Ethan spotted her retreating figure and immediately went after her. He caught up with her in the parking lot, where she was fumbling with her car keys, her hands shaking. Grace, wait, he called out, his voice laced with urgency. She turned to face him, her eyes filled with anger and hurt. Why did you let me come here, Ethan? Why did you make me believe I could fit into this world? Because you do fit, he said, his voice firm. Don't let Savannah or anyone else tell you otherwise. She doesn't have to, Grace snapped. I see it every time I walk in there. I'm not like them, Ethan, and no matter how hard I try, I never will be. Ethan stepped closer, his expression raw with emotion. Good, because I don't want you to be like them. I want you to be you, the person who's brave enough to show up, even when it's hard, the person who inspires me every damn day. Grace blinked, caught off guard by the intensity in his voice. You mean that? Of course I do, he said, his voice softening. Grace, you're not just a client to me. You're someone I care about, a lot. The admission hung in the air between them, heavy with unspoken possibilities. Grace's heart raced, her anger and hurt giving way to something warmer, something she hadn't felt in a long time. Ethan, she began, her voice barely above a whisper. I don't know if I can do this. If I can handle. You can, he interrupted, his tone resolute. And you don't have to do it alone. I'm with you, Grace, every step of the way. For the first time in weeks, Grace felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe she didn't have to fight this battle on her own. Maybe, just maybe, Ethan was right. The next morning, Ethan called an all-staff meeting. As the trainers and staff gathered in the main area, Savannah arrived last, her expression smug as she took a seat near the back. Ethan stood at the front, his arms crossed. I've been hearing a lot of things lately, he began, his voice carrying through the room. Things that go against everything this gym stands for. The room fell silent, the tension palpable. This place isn't about perfection, Ethan continued. It's about progress. It's about supporting each other, no matter where we're starting from. And if anyone here doesn't get that, you're in the wrong gym. Savannah's smile faltered, her eyes narrowing. Ethan's gaze swept the room, landing briefly on Grace, who stood near the back, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. I won't tolerate anyone making others feel unwelcome here. If I hear one more rumor, one more snide comment, you're out. No exceptions. The message was clear, and for the first time, Savannah looked genuinely uncomfortable. Ethan's eyes met Grace's, and she gave him a small nod, a silent acknowledgement of his support. As the meeting ended, Grace approached him, her expression unreadable. That was intense, she said quietly. Ethan smiled. It needed to be said. Thank you, she said, her voice soft but sincere, for everything. Ethan reached out, gently brushing a stray strand of hair from her face. Anytime. For the first time, Grace felt like she truly belonged, not just in the gym, but in her own skin. And for the first time, she began to believe that maybe, just maybe, she was enough. The buzz of activity at Echelon Fitness had shifted. The usual air of exclusivity seemed lighter, more open, as if Ethan's speech had cracked a long-standing facade. For the first time in weeks, Grace felt a tentative sense of belonging. But Savannah's icy glare during workouts was a constant reminder that not everyone had embraced the change. Ethan, however, seemed energized by his decision to take a stand. He doubled down on his efforts to make the gym a space for all, launching new programs aimed at inclusivity and creating a mentorship program for clients just starting their fitness journeys. He even asked Grace to help him design marketing materials for the initiative. It felt like a small victory, but Grace still couldn't shake the nagging doubts that lingered in the back of her mind. It wasn't until the charity gala that everything came to a head. The event was hosted by one of Echelon's wealthiest clients, an influential socialite named Miranda Hayes. The guest list was packed with the city's elite, many of whom were either members of Ethan's gym or followers of his burgeoning fitness empire. Ethan had invited Grace to join him, insisting she deserved to be there just as much as anyone else. Grace hesitated at first. The idea of mingling with these people, Savannah included, felt like walking into a lion's den. But Ethan wouldn't take no for an answer. You've earned your place, Grace, he told her, his eyes steady. This isn't about fitting in. It's about showing up and owning who you are. His words stayed with her as she stood in front of her mirror the night of the event, smoothing down the fabric of the emerald green dress she'd chosen. It was simple but elegant, hugging her curves in all the right places. For the first time in years, she felt beautiful. You can do this, she whispered to herself before heading out. The gala was held at a sprawling estate in Beverly Hills, its gardens glittering with fairy lights and the soft hum of live jazz floating through the air. Grace stepped out of the car, her heart pounding as she took in the scene. Ethan was waiting for her near the entrance, looking devastatingly handsome in a tailored suit. You clean up nice, he said with a grin, offering her his arm. So do you, she replied, feeling a surge of confidence as she slipped her hand into the crook of his elbow. As they walked through the crowd, Grace felt the familiar prickle of eyes on her. Whispers followed in their wake, but Ethan didn't seem to notice or care. He introduced her to clients and business partners with the same warmth and enthusiasm he showed everyone, making it clear that she was more than just his guest. Savannah, however, was less subtle. Dressed in a glittering silver gown that seemed designed to command attention, she made a point of approaching Ethan every chance she got, brushing her hand against his arm and leaning in just a little too close. Ethan, she purred, her smile as sharp as glass. I've been meaning to talk to you about the new programs. They're bold, but are you sure they're the right move for your brand? Ethan's jaw tightened, but he kept his tone polite. I'm confident they are. Fitness should be accessible to everyone, Savannah. That's always been the goal. Savannah's eyes flicked to Grace, her smile turning cold. Of course, it's so inspiring to see you championing inclusivity. Grace felt the sting of the barb but refused to rise to it. Instead, she met Savannah's gaze head on. It's not just inspiring, she said evenly. It's necessary. Savannah's smile faltered for a split second before she recovered. Well, some people might say it's a bit idealistic, but I suppose there's no harm in dreaming. Ethan cut in before Grace could respond, his voice firm. I'd rather dream big than stay stuck in the past. Savannah's eyes narrowed, but before she could reply, a waiter appeared with a tray of champagne. Ethan took 2 glasses, handing one to Grace. If you'll excuse us, Savannah, we have some mingling to do. As the evening wore on, Grace found herself relaxing. Ethan stayed by her side, introducing her to people who actually seemed interested in her work and story. For the first time, she felt like more than a spectator in Ethan's world. She was part of it. But just as the night seemed to be winding down, Savannah made her final move. Grace was standing near the dessert table, chatting with Miranda, when Savannah appeared with a glass of wine in hand. She smiled sweetly at Miranda before turning to Grace. Grace, she said, her tone deceptively friendly. I've been meaning to ask, how does it feel to be Ethan's project? The words were a slap in the face, and the surrounding conversation seemed to hush as heads turned toward them. Grace's breath hitched, but she forced herself to stay calm. I don't know, Savannah, she said, her voice steady. How does it feel to be Ethan's past? A ripple of laughter spread through the small crowd, and Savannah's face turned scarlet. Before she could respond, Ethan appeared at Grace's side, his expression unreadable. Is there a problem here? He asked, his voice cool. Not at all, Grace said, tilting her head at Savannah. Savannah was just sharing her unique perspective on things. Ethan's gaze hardened as he looked at Savannah. I think it's time we called it a night. Savannah opened her mouth to protest, but Ethan was already steering Grace away. As they walked toward the exit, Grace felt a surge of triumph and relief. Outside, the cool night air was a welcome reprieve from the tension inside. Ethan stopped near the valet stand, turning to Grace with an apologetic look. I'm sorry about that, he said. She had no right. Don't apologize, Grace interrupted, her voice firm. I handled it. Ethan smiled, pride flickering in his eyes. Yeah, you did, and you were amazing. Grace's cheeks flushed, but she met his gaze. Thanks for sticking by me tonight. I don't think I could have done it without you. You could have, he said softly, but I'm glad you didn't have to. They stood there for a moment, the sounds of the party fading into the background. Grace felt the weight of the past few weeks lifting, replaced by something warmer, steadier. For the first time, she allowed herself to believe that she wasn't just surviving, she was thriving. Ethan, she said, her voice hesitant. I don't know where this is going, but I'm glad we're in it together. Me too, he said, stepping closer. Grace, you've taught me more about strength and resilience than anyone else I've ever met. And I don't just mean in the gym. Her heart raced as he reached for her hand, his touch warm and grounding. You've changed my life, Grace, and I want to see where this goes, if you're willing. She smiled, the answer already clear in her mind. I'm willing. As the valet pulled up with Ethan's car, they climbed in, the tension and uncertainty of the night left behind. For the first time, Grace felt like she was exactly where she belonged, beside someone who saw her for who she truly was, imperfections and all. Together, they were unstoppable. Back at the gym the following week, Grace noticed a shift. People no longer whispered or stared. Instead, they smiled, some even offering words of encouragement. Ethan's inclusivity program was already gaining traction, attracting new clients who saw the gym as a place of growth, not judgment. And for Grace, it was more than just a gym. It was a reminder that sometimes the hardest battles are the ones we fight within ourselves, and that victory comes when we embrace who we are, flaws and all.